All of us will experience moments in life that are so sacred, so special, that they mark our soul, shift our values and perspectives, and take up significant territory in our mind and heart. They are often peaks of joy in our life or deep valleys of tragedy, burned in our minds in a multisensory way that have a way of invading our present when something else awakens it. They are hard to explain. After all, how do you describe God speaking to your soul through a sunset, the loss of a parent, being alone during a miscarriage, or the bond forged from battle? I call these sacred spaces. Over the years, this phrase has helped my husband and I communicate some of the very different sacred moments we have individually been through when we needed to ask the other to tread lightly around it. It has also permitted us to accept the times when those sacred spaces have taken up more territory than we wanted. Just as our early experiences of the military lifestyle imprint and inform our future expectations of the community, sacred spaces can easily become a lens through which we process life and relationships as well. For Matt and I, in different ways, sacred friendships and tragedies found through especially our first assignment and deployment have been a lens through which we have clearly processed our experience of the military culture shifting. Historic battles like COP Keating and the examples of leaders like Brad Brown continue to inspire the why behind what we do. In the final chapter of Military Culture Shift, I reference a theory of reconstitution written by Stoney Portis after he commanded the troop that survived that battle and needed to somehow become mission ready again. After reading his reflection on what it took to holistically serve the battle-weary troops who had honestly earned every right to hang up the one tattered uniform they had left, I knew it was a case study on what it would take to reconstitute an entire culture as well. So I invited now Lieutenant Colonel Stoney Portis to join Matt and I in a discussion about their shared sacred space in hopes that it could validate the sacred spaces in your own life, but also inspire the healing in us all. I'm Corie Weathers. You're listening to Military Culture Shift, a limited series podcast on the impact of war, money, and generational perspective on morale, retention, and leadership.
Stoney joined us early on in our first deployment. It was 2009. He came in and he took command of Black Knight Troop, Bravo Troop, and 361 Cav. And, I was really impressed automatically just with his unflappability. Like, he is unnervingly calm at times, but he also is able to carry on an amazing conversation. He's extremely well read. I think he's gotten a couple of degrees from the Army. They just keep sending him back and educating him higher and higher. I think you've got your PhD now. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So Dr. Stoney Portis, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Stoney Portis, Esquire. So there's a couple things. I would consider Stoney a warrior poet, and not simply because of his love for prior service, like veterans, like the writings of warriors over time, and how that informs their psychological experience of war, the emotional experience, the toll that it takes. It gives this extremely well-rounded view of what it takes, the soldier's experience. And I think that's what he's focused on. He has an incredibly deep love for the people that he has served with. And I wouldn't just say that he's commanded, because he never came across, he commands well, but he never came across like, I am in charge of you, you all just follow me. It was very much of a servant-oriented heart. He's humble. It was always a thing, like, he would say something and you would say something back. And if it was a counterpoint, he would touche. That was his thing. Right. But it was a mark of somebody that was willing to hear out what another person was saying, to listen to it and all the way through it, and to grow. So he's a consummate learner, and an amazing friend. And from what I know, from his continued interaction with people that we've served with, especially back in 361, he is still there for them. And so that just evidences a massive heart inside his chest. So he is absolutely the best, absolutely the best. So that has been my experience of Dr. Lieutenant Colonel Stoney Portis, Esquire. So.
Stoney, we're so glad to have you. Thank you for being here. Share a little bit about your personal story. Give a little bit of background.
Yeah, thanks. And I don't know that I can live up to any kind of an introduction like that, but thanks for doing this. Thanks for letting me come on. Thanks for your friendship and your service. And I truly mean that. And Corie, thanks for writing this incredible, book and a prescient book for our time. From the introduction throughout the case studies, you give just such a granular understanding of the complexity of what it is that our soldiers, our families, our veterans do, and why they do it. It complicates, it clarifies, and I just think it's going to be, an incredible reference for the ages. So thanks for writing that. A little bit about myself. I am a husband and a father, and as we all know, my service is also my family's service, my family's sacrifice, and so I just want to start there. Kind of as the starting point for everything that I do. But hey, I've had a career probably similar to most career military officers in various leadership positions, from the lieutenant, platoon leader level through the battalion command lieutenant colonel level. Currently, I find myself as a director on the National Security Council for the White House, and most of what I deal with is political and military affairs. So particularly interested in kind of the policy perspectives that you employ in the book. But throughout my life, as an Army officer, from graduating to West Point to current, I've been off and on tanks and other armored vehicles like Bradleys, and so that informs a little bit about the formal training that I've had. But for the deployments, oddly, and I've had 7 of them up to this point, but particularly the combat deployments, like they weren't mounted by and large. They were dismounted, and the one from that I think that we're going to be talking about at least a little bit, Afghanistan 2009, was largely dismounted out of necessity because of the terrain. But what I guess for me, what I'll say is that my service was a starting point. The battle in 2009 that you write a little bit about was a starting point, but it's really what's happened since then that I think informs hopefully this conversation. And just as a quick example, once you are a unit chaplain, you are always that unit's chaplain, right? Mm-hmm. Once you are a unit's personnel officer, adjutant, you're always that unit's adjutant.
As long as you're not awkward. If you're awkward, then you don't get those calls again.
They boot you off the island quickly, right? Exactly. But I say that because I was the company commander for Bravo Troop 361 Cavalry in 2009 and 10. But to this day, I still kind of remain something of the company commander like figure for a lot of the soldiers of that battle. And not to say that like I have any kind of seniority or I'm in charge of them, although oddly, like folks will still interact with me and call me Captain Portis or call me sir, even though they unquestionably are superior to me in so many ways. But the reason why I say that is because when folks had come back to me to want to share their story, or when there's a need to upgrade a soldier's award, which we have done, when there's a need to submit someone for a Purple Heart for a wound that they received during this deployment, this battle, and it's 10, 15 years past, I'm the one that they come to do that.
Yeah.
And so there's a service there. There's a connection there from someone who understands that can carry that forward in ways that that I just think is probably unique to our profession. And what I would assume, Matt and Corie, based off of our conversations over the years, is that it's certainly the same for you, both for me personally, when we have reached out and reconnected, but also to the very many soldiers and families that continue to remain in touch after and since 2009. So just to kind of start out how I think, and I generally like to think I approach this topic. So
I think that's definitely something that's been a protective factor for a lot of people, is the ability to maintain relationships for a long period of time, over time, not just in these very episodic, very deeply emotional moments.
No, well said. Well said. Just a quick anecdote. I hadn't really thought about this until you just said that, but every year on October 3rd, I call all of the officers that were at COP Keating on October 3rd, 2009.
Yeah.
So, and when I say COP Keating, I'm also talking about observation post Fritchie. So you can imagine that's 4 platoon leaders. That's the XO, the forward support officer, and Chris Cordova, the PA, and then Brad Brown. And so I will tell you, for the first 7 or 8 years, that was a really, really painful burden to carry. I would have even described it at the time as a chore. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you, it would take a little bit more thinking for me to say when this switched, but at some point it switched from being a really painful and cathartic experience to actually being one of the joys of my year. For a long time, I said that October is the nadir of my year. And that's because that happened to be the months that my mom passed away. It happened to be not that same year, but in October is when my mom passed away. And in October is when COP Keating happened. So it's just a tough month. But there's something about the revisiting of that pain and that grief and the healing process there that has really brought a lot of joy and happiness. And so now, like when I call and I'll check in with Andrew Bunderman, who is the platoon leader of 1st Platoon, or Ben Salentine, or any a number of those folks on October 3rd, I mean, it's just, hey, how's your family? How are you doing? And it's an investment in the relationship. Mm-hmm. And there's, really, something has grown there that I don't think any of us would have expected was the case. And so, I think there's something to that circular relationship.
Can I just ask, Stoney, because I have been just so impressed, not surprised necessarily, because I think, as Matt described in the beginning, you've always been somebody that deeply cared about those that you were serving with and their families. And I know even after that event, there was a lot of conversation shortly after, when everyone came home, of what does it actually look like to continue to reach out to Gold Star families as we can and as they feel comfortable. There was just a lot of mindfulness. And so I think I want to just pause for a second and acknowledge that I don't know if every leader is comfortable with doing what you have continued to do over the years. B, I think a lot of leaders don't know if they're the ones that should, because there's a lot of levels of leadership involved in something like this. And so I would really like to just ask, what was it that motivated you, or what drives you to, especially originally, take on that role? Almost immediately, you took on that role of taking care of those that were around you. And I also saw you partner and do that really well with Matt, with other people that were also in servant roles. So what drove you to do that initially, and what continues to motivate you to stay involved?
I think a couple of things, and that's a tough question, but I would first point to page 274 of your book, where you quote Brad Brown's speech at the battalion ball, where he also talks about, this really interesting juxtaposition of service and sacrifice, and how it's kind of, if I were to reduce it into, one really pithy point, I think what he is describing is the, if not me, then who kind of construct. And so I think for folks that are interested in a really interesting and eloquent case study on that topic, look to Brown's speech there. It's just a couple pages of reading and really, really worth the while. I think for me, it actually starts with my involvement in this event. I'm not the war hero here, right? Like I wasn't a prominent fixture in the battle. That was all the soldiers that were there when the fighting kicked off at 6 a.m. Whether it's, Stephen Mace or Ty Carter, Clint Romachet, it doesn't matter. but those were the war heroes. I mean, I came down, I landed on, so I was separated for an odd reason, geographically, when a helicopter that I was in took fire, and we had to limp the helicopter back to the FOB, and I flew back to Keating and went down with from the mountaintop observation post down to Keating with the reinforcements, the quick reaction force. So I didn't get there until near the end of the battle. And so I think that speaks to what I thought my role was then as the commander, right? It was kind of the one odd sequence of events where, I mean, yes, we had a lot of other combat engagements throughout the rest of the deployment, but my battle began as the commander and continues today when that battle ended. Yeah. And so the battle for me was not how do we close with and destroy the enemy for this particular story. Rather, it was, hey, how do you put this unit back together in the midst of combat when they're suffering from the grief of fallen soldiers, when they are suffering from their own post-traumatic stress, when their own belongings, personal equipment, and military equipment have been burned in the fire. How do you do that, right? And and at the time, I remember being wanting for an answer because, through all my education at West Point and at the career course, I knew what the systems were to replenish depleted ranks. I knew what the systems were to get new equipment. But what I didn't really have a good handle on was how do you heal a unit that is more broken than it is whole? And so I think that was the start of my command. That was the start of my leadership in following this deployment, was the healing portion. And so we could talk more about that as you're interested with actually the kind of the technicalities of the unit reconstruction. But what I found is that unequivocally included and necessarily included the family, the unit family, right? Not just the soldiers. And so from the very beginning, when I was telling this story, when I was helping the unit to heal from this story, it started in the condolence letters that I wrote to the families of the fallen and continued from there while we were still at COP Keating for those couple of days afterwards, while we were still at Fort Operating Base Bostic. And so I think that's just where my journey began. And that's why it continued in the way that it did.
So I would love for you guys to talk through some of the aftermath of what that was like psychologically for the group, because I do think there's a parallel conversation we can have about the cohort that just especially finished the global war on terrorism, I think largely ending more wounded than they were whole. And I think that's where we find ourselves looking at the entire community. What does it look like to reconstitute the force? And so if you guys could go back a little bit and talk about what your experience was. Stoney, I know in the beginning years, you were really trying to figure out what were those missing or not missing, what were the pieces that were present that really helped the group reunify, that led you to, I believe, write this paper. But I think that you continued to be curious about it even after this paper. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
It started from the top down between Brad Brown and Rob Wilson. Their trust in their O's and NCOs was deep and abiding. And I remember there was a time when Mark Campbell and I, the S1, went to Brad and we were like, hey, you're not like really micromanaging. Is there a lot, or do you have any questions of us? Like, how we're doing? And he's like, are you doing your job? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, great, keep doing your job. And so that enabled us to really flourish, to collaborate at our level, all across the captain level, just running a little captain mafia there. And that worked extremely well. So there were a lot of preparatory things that were done and just were in place. So by the time this happened, it reminded me of, that last ditch effort in a football game where, it's the last play and they've got to score and they're just trying to keep it alive. And as long as they can keep pitching the ball, they're keeping alive. So it felt like so often we're just pitching the football to one another, knowing that the other person is where they need to be, doing what they need to do in order to catch the ball, keep running with it. And then you have to figure out, where do I need to be in respect to where they are, so I am an option when they need me. And so that was the best way that I can easily describe it.
The one thing that I would add is the role of generational leadership. And just to explain what I mean by that is you don't get the kind of cohesive unit that you would have gotten in any one of the platoons and any one of the troops in 361 Cav without the troop, the squadron, and the brigade all having leaders that enabled that type of command climate.
Yeah. And
I think that it's worth noting, this is extremely rare. I don't remember the exact statistics. I want to say it's less than 20% of a cohort will reach battalion command. A commissioned cohort of officers will reach battalion command level positions. Yeah. And if you look at, just to go like really quick through the numbers of just the group that deployed to Afghanistan in 2009, you've got the FSC commander, Matt Meyer, who has completed battalion command. You've got the Alpha Troop commander, who is just completing battalion command and going to be the next G3. That's Jay Ireland. You've got, I myself stayed in and completed battalion command. You've Adam McAllister, again, battalion command. He's finishing up some school and is going on to be a brigade level commander. All of us, right? Okay, great. Pat on the back. That
they're battalion commander. Let's just say that doesn't happen.
Right. But, and also what's less important is the battalion command thing. What's more important is that you had that type of a retention among a group of leaders and soldiers who had every excuse to be able to get out of the Army after what they endured. Yeah. And that would not have been enabled had it not been for leaders like Brad Brown. And had it not been enabled with brigade commander like Randy George, who, oh, by the way, is the chief of staff of the Army now, right? And so, I mean, there is, I don't want to say magic, but there is a confluence of events that I think one can amount to luck. Yeah. And if we want to say that luck is hard work paying off, then okay, General George and Colonel Brown worked their tail off to enable a command climate like what we had in 361 Cav that enabled leaders to have the freedom and flexibility to explore different styles of leadership that maybe focused more on recovering and healing for some, like myself, than closing with and destroying the enemy for others, right? And so I think that's worth saying. And the last thing that I'll say about that is that I've always said there's no problem in the Army that I haven't been able to solve by simply focusing on the people. And it's because the Army is a people institution, and the problems are going to be solved by the people. And so if you have no other understanding, but an understanding and grasp of the human condition, that's going to be able to inform the type of leader that your soldiers need. Yeah. So just some thoughts there.
Yeah. And to add on to that from the NCO side of the house as well. I mean, so you have Command Sergeant Major Kilpatrick, you have Command Sergeant Major Egan, Command Sergeant Major Mikan, Command Sergeant Major Ross,
that's right.
Command Sergeant Major LaRock. You can just start, and it's fascinating that all of them, were staff sergeant first class, some on their second or third deployment, and to a person, they've all hit Sergeant Major and are continuing to go. And so it is fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for highlighting the NCOs there, because that's where the true leadership, that's where the true rubber meets the road, right? With all of these very complicated, wicked problems that you read about. So.
Yeah, but back to your point on, I've never met an Army problem that I haven't been able to solve by focusing on the people. That is exactly going into the reconstitution conversation. That's where it was. And I think back to a moment that I had in a warfighter with the division staff. One of our battalions, large scale combat, one of the battalions just got completely annihilated, right? And we're running a Europe scenario, and the G3 runs over there and starts banging his finger on the board and saying, get my combat power back up right now. And we all kind of looked and we're like, that doesn't just happen. We can't hand wave that. That your tanks are gone, your people are gone. This isn't like Magic the Gathering. We don't just whip out another card and go, it's not Uno reverse. And so sometimes people focus overly on the tangible assets. Like, we need more people, we need more equipment, and that's all real and valid. But there is, if you read in FM30, they talk about endurance and the will to fight. They talk about that often. Mm-hmm. We want to bring down the enemy's will to fight while also increasing ours. And that was something that we were learning back then the hard way, because within 3 days, the entire unit collapses back on the fob. We go through a round robin where we're making sure they get all the uniforms, everything they need, including all tobacco products that we had gotten sent up from Jalalabad to make sure, that nobody is like jonesing. So they get all their tobacco products. We get a place for them to sleep. And I can remember some vivid moments of just walking from that place where it was right outside the S1 shop where we get all their stuff together and we walk them up. And one of the soldiers, I won't name who's notable in the events afterwards, just broke in like the sweetest way. And you could see in that moment, they had been guarded, and they finally felt like the squadron had wrapped their arms around them, said, "You're safe. Now come home, get some rest," kind of thing. And it had been 3 days. They'd been on, right? Mm-hmm. But also everybody processing. And so from my perspective, day after that, the next 3 days, we went through the traumatic event management. Katie Kopp and I sat down with everybody and talked through it. Stoney, I believe, was working all the pieces of the write-ups, all the definite things you have to do for good order and discipline of writing up what had happened, summarizing it, taking a look at it, knowing that there are going to be more questions than probably answers afterwards. So everybody kind of found their piece, like, Cordova and the medical team and Katie Kopp in there with the medical side of behavioral health. Like, medically, where do we need to approach this? I just made myself open to sitting down with everybody to figure out where their soul was, what they were processing. And some people who had been, from my perspective, had been like really strong believers were like, okay, now I have zero idea where God is in this moment. And it was letting everybody be where they were at and meeting them where they were at and understanding, you could get all their gear back together. You could get them all Humvees. You could get them back on the road. You could make sure they have all those things. But where is their will to fight? Because we had just started the deployment.
Well, and Stoney, in 2014, you wrote in your thesis about this idea of reconstitution, kind of really looking at this experience as a case study. Mm-hmm. And you talk about what's called a combat and operational stress control team. You call it COSC. That includes a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and internal chaplain support to oversee that debriefing process. So obviously this stayed on your mind of like, what does it mean to reconstitute? So would you mind explaining a little bit about what you were looking for when you were working on this thesis? And you can even expand since then, because I know that was 2014 was 10 years ago. So I know I really am wanting to pick your brain on all the thoughts you've had since then.
Yeah. So I guess maybe it's worth just really quick overview of like what reconstitution is. And at the time, the most relevant field manual, which is what we revert to in the Army, right? For instruction, was FM 100-9. I think it was published around 91 or 92 in conjunction with the adoption of air-land battle doctrine. And the idea was that if it, on in a large battle scenario on the European continent with the Russians as an example, the United States military would be outnumbered, and so one way to solve that problem of numerical superiority is to be able to reconstitute units very quickly on the battlefield. And so that was that document, F109, is on unit reconstitutions, which by the time we were in Afghanistan in 2009 had been rendered obsolete for a number of reasons. But it was in that document that they had posited this idea of what at that time we called a combat operational stress control team. And they had done, the Army had commissioned this pretty big study. I think it was like the BMD core study of some external consultants that came out and said, hey, like when we're thinking about reconstitution, what we really care about is combat effectiveness. We're all cogs in the wheel, right? So how do we look at this problem set in terms of making a unit more combat effective? And the design was actually for divisions to reconstitute battalions. So I had adopted it for all intents and purposes, a brigade to reconstitute a company, a troop, because the brigade is the one that had the assets, right? The clinical psychiatrists and psychologists, Marshall as an example that you'd mentioned, and Katie, that wasn't a company, that wasn't a battalion, squadron level asset, that was a brigade level asset. And so it was a brigade using its resources to rebuild a unit. And that's all that reconstitution is rebuilding across the full panoply of capabilities, from people to equipment to training and capabilities. So the BMD Corps came in and did this study, and they said, hey, look, like when we think about unit reconstitutions, there's really two big buckets we can think about. One is what they called, if I remember right, a tangible metric of combat effectiveness. So intangible, the things you can actually touch. So think about bullets, carbines, Humvees, or people, right? Numbers of people. Those are things you can actually touch. And then there are the intangible factors of combat effectiveness. And that's those things that are just kind of, a little bit more elusive, a little bit more qualitative. So leadership, right? Morale, cohesion. And it was very clear that by this point in the war, like we knew how to get after those tangible factors. But it wasn't exactly clear to me how to get after those intangible factors, especially in a very limited time frame, in a very constrained environment, like on combat, like on FOB Bostic, like in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. But the first thing that we had to do was, if we wanted to focus on those intangible factors, that meant focusing on the people. We had to take our people, our team, away from the immediate threat. So out of combat outpost Keating, onto a safer place. So FOB Bostic at the time, relatively safer. And we were not going on combat deployments for a couple weeks, or combat patrol for a couple weeks. And during that time is when we were able to really kind of like shock the system with really starting with the debriefs that you and Katie provided. And moving on from there. I think the Marshall and Katie stayed for a number of days there at FOB Bostic, but then like they're a very limited resource. So they would fly out to FOB Bostic a couple times a week for the next, remainder of the deployment, to be an available resource to soldiers. But like, it doesn't just end with a chaplain, a clinical psychiatrist, and a psychologist, right? I mean, you've got the problem of leadership, right? And the problem of replacements. If you'll recall, a pretty large percentage of the troop was rendered a non-RTD status, right? Not just to mention the 8 that were killed in the battle, but there was an additional 19 at the time of those 54 that were wounded and received Purple Hearts. And so we got new soldiers, right? And so how do you build a cohesion from one unit that is trained and fought together for years at this point with all those new guys? And how do you get training in the midst of combat? And so we were literally doing like mortar training and IMT, movement techniques on FOB Bostic, getting, just back to the basics. So I don't want to get too much in the weeds there, but that's kind of like how we approached it. That's why I approached it from that direction. And it really had to develop the art of the on-off switch for a lot of our soldiers. I had a number of soldiers that for years after the deployment were really challenged by the post-traumatic stress that they were experiencing on a daily basis. And they unquestionably were experiencing it in the midst of that deployment. Yet we asked them, we had to continue to go on these missions where we continued to get into firefights on a weekly basis. And so how do you turn that off to go on a combat patrol and then turn it back on, or allow yourself to turn it back on when you come back? And I think that to move past our fears, but ironically, that process also forces you to kind of package up in a little black box all those feelings that you don't want to deal with. And someday you're going to have to pull that box off the shelf and deal with it. And so I think that's really kind of the aftermath that we continue to see in the years following.
Yeah. And some people, I talked to one guy who was kind of an extreme athlete that was involved in that. And I asked him, I was like, hey, you're always going, man. Like, you are like physically fit and you're just like triathleting your life away. And he was like, yeah, that's just how I keep going, And so there's an aspect of some people dealt with it by just keep going. Like they just went on to the next thing, just went on to the next thing. And then maybe over time they found the time and space to be able to pull that box off the shelf and look at the contents little by little and go through it. The amount of soldiers that over time have gotten sober and decided that, they had self-medicated those moments away in their mind, and then had to finally go, okay, I actually have to take a look at this. And I know for me personally, within the last 18 months, 24 months, I started running into, speaking of all those old NCOs, I started running into them in random places as I'm like TDYing around the Army. And I'd run into them and like have this amazing, beautiful, wonderful, like heart to heart connection. I'm excited to see them. They're excited to see me. And then for a couple hours afterwards, I remember being in a Cracker Barrel and not knowing where I was. Like, I was like, I know I'm in a Cracker Barrel because they all look the same, right? But I was like, I don't know if I've had breakfast yet. I don't know if I've, and so I looked down, I was like, I have a receipt. So clearly I've had breakfast. I probably should pay. And so it's been, for me,
it resurrected
stuff, but it showed me I had kept going. I was one of those that just like kept the bags packed, kept the box on the shelf, and just kept going. So when you talk about going back to I want to read a quote that's actually on the conference room in used to be the Chaplain Center in school. It's now the U.S. Army Institute for Religious Leadership, but it's George C. Marshall from the quote that he gave at Trinity College. Because you said morale, and it's interesting because morale is the word he's referring to in this. The soldier's heart, the soldier's spirit, the soldier's soul are everything. Unless the soldier's soul sustains him, he cannot be relied on and will fail himself and his commander and his country in the end. So getting supply chains back up is fairly easy. Because I can actually count the number of bullets we have. I can count the number of Humvees we have. I can look and go, that's when these things will get here. But your intangible comment, and that's one of those things that leads us into the purpose of the discussion, because we're at a reconstitution place with the Army right now. I mean, I'm serving on a unit right now with a bunch of senior leaders we have a lower op tempo. And because we have a little bit of a lower op tempo as OCTs, people are starting to deal with stuff, and they're starting to like take stock. They're going back in the inventory, dusting the shelves off and seeing what's actually there. And we're at an interesting reconstitution place where we do have replacements coming in. We have a lot of newbies that are showing up, as some people might say, slick sleeve, looking and going, what can I expect of this organization, this institution that has just gone through 2 decades of war and has forged some incredible bonds that are like iron together. I see them, and I see them above me wearing all their badges or their, 7 deployments, and somebody going, I don't even know what that would look like. How could I even survive that? So we have these replacements currently in Big Army, but we also have these people that are like, finally, they've gotten back to a safe place, and they're going, okay, now what? Like, how do I take stock? And it's one thing to take stock over a significant episodic moment that exists at one point in time that is punctiliar. It's another thing to take stock over 2 decades and to try and add a narrative to that gives it purpose and meaning, and also helps them go, how do you reconstitute your own will to fight and maintain endurance, while also incorporating all these new replacements. And it is the tangibles, it's the movement to contact, but it's also the intangibles of how do I help you adopt this spirit that we've forged and formed over time, because it's precious to us.
What I think about with that, Matt, is just a quick reflection on leadership. And like we live in a world where like there's this draw to be big and impactful, right? I want to be the influencer. I want to be the leader. I want to be the commander. I want to be the celebrity. And we can talk about leadership in the abstract all day. But the reality is, if you want to have an impact, you want to get after a problem that is thorny as the one that you just described, you have to get personal. And it's that if not me, then who moment. And, I give a couple of quick examples, if you don't mind. So we had a soldier who was wounded in the battle, who redeployed back to the United States for treatment, got out of the Army, was suffering from post-traumatic stress, and ended up losing his life. Some would argue that he took his life because he overdosed on drugs. Others would argue that he just overdosed. In either case, he lost his life, and it was when he was seemingly kind of at the bottom of his pain and torture for his wartime experiences. Similarly, there was another soldier, another NCO, who was wounded and who was suffering from post-traumatic stress in the days following the outpost, the battle, and who wanted to redeploy to get a different type of treatment. He was displeased with the kind of treatment he was able to get in country. And as a leader, I remember making a pretty tough call, and it was a controversial call. In fact, it was the topic of an Associated Press article, where I said, no, this soldier needs to stay. And I made the argument to my battalion commander or squadron commander and my brigade commander as to why this NCO should stay, and why, rather than sending him home where he might be able to get a better type of treatment, in fact, keeping him in the deployment, to finish the deployment, to have that sense of accomplishment, to be around the community of other soldiers, and to then prioritize him to be able to get the kind of treatments that he needed by shifting his position within the troop away from the combat patrols, so he could still have an impact and still be useful to the mission and to the organization and maintain it. That was my justification. And that was a really hard thing. And I came under fire for that.
Yeah.
A lot of what we do as leaders is going to be really unpopular, but the leader is the one, and this is leader at all levels, right? Corporal, first sergeant, whatever, is the one that has to get directly involved. It's going to have to make the hard decisions. It's going to have to make sometimes the self-sacrificing decisions. And what I'll tell you is, I haven't talked to this NCO in a number of years now, but he finished that deployment. And he went back to school, and he got a degree in behavioral science. And he went on to have an impact as in the form of a counselor for kids. And I don't know that that's because of anything that I did, but I'll tell you what I wasn't going to do on my conscience was make a decision that I thought that was going to be deleterious to him and or the unit. That's a decision that you have to make, right? And there's a community there that is required in a reconstitution. And without that community, like as was the case for Ed, who ended up taking his life, that's what happened. Now, similarly, I had told the stories of the Battle of COP Keating and Kamdesh for years, and the letters of condolence and the awards that I wrote and the AARs that I gave to military units and military leaders, and even in some of the articles that I wrote, I told that. Yet it wasn't until I was with one of my best friends, I think it was 2018, Chris Cordova, that he and I flew to Sofia, Bulgaria, to the set of the outpost where it was being filmed. And we walk in, and it is like a mirror image. It is eerie how exact it looked like COP Keating. And we walk into the aid station, again, spitting image. And I look to my right, and Chris just has these tears flowing down his face, right? Again, like I had the moment there to give him his distance, to give him his space.
Yeah.
But I chose not to, right? What I watched happen the rest of that day is that it was on that day that we were on set that they were filming the part of the battle where Stephen Mace is brought back into the aid station and Chris Cordova executes a whole blood transfusion, the first of its kind, in combat, having never received any formal training on this
After
before.
Pulling the kit out of the trash.
That's right. Right. Gives his own unit of blood because he was a match to Cordova, to Stefan. Brings Stefan back to consciousness. Is having conversations with him. That's the moment that they're filming.
Yeah. And
I watch them film this episode take after take after take. And the entire time there's Chris in the corner watching it. And I tell you what, if the cameras hadn't been there, I would have thought my mind was playing tricks on me to watch this happen. And take after take after take, the actors involved in the scene and the director stopped, consulted with Chris, and then ran it again to make that moment match his memory. And look, that movie is not a flawless rendering of what we experienced. But what I'll tell you is that one scene is as accurate as Chris Cordova can remember it. And maybe there's something to be said for, exposure therapy or what have you. But what's more important to me here was to have been with Chris in that moment. And I was just there with him in that moment as a community to experience that memory, to experience that grief, what Jonathan Shea calls the communalization of grief. That is a moment of catharsis that invokes healing. And you're not going to reconstitute a team, a troop, a battalion, let alone an army, unless that there is a community of others that are going to internalize and experience that grief together so they can objectify it and so they can honor it and so they can remember it and then move past it. Not because they're getting over it and forgetting it, but so it's an appropriate part of their lives, and you're just not going to do that alone. So if you want to be a person of impact, you've already taken that step by joining the military. You've already taken that step by supporting the military as a spouse or family member. Be there with any of those folks to help communalize that grief. That would be my challenge to those that are listening.
Yeah. So the word community means a lot for me, and it reminds me of something I read in to our career course. I was training him last week. It's an excerpt from Helmut Thielicke's a book called Christ and the Meaning of Life. And he talks about, he was a Lutheran pastor, Lutheran professor, when he resisted the National Socialist Party, but he was still subject to the bombings that were happening from the Allies. And he has this beautiful picture that he paints where he tells this wonderful story. When the bombing started, he would actually try and dissociate and actually go to a happy place. And he would imagine this, beautiful idyllic countryside and cows coming home and people hanging out. And he goes, but after a while, that became torturous because there was so much dissonance between this picture I'm painting in my head, where I'm escaping the reality that I'm currently in, and what I see in other people's faces. And he goes, what I actually became healing was when I would emerge from my house after the bombings and I would look in the faces of the other people who were experiencing what I was experiencing in that moment. Then I felt home. I felt seen. I felt whole because I realized I'm not alone. And then he goes on to talk about how Christ embodies that for his believers. But there's this sense of within our tribe, and Thielicke uses this beautiful phrase that Henry Nouwen also uses, wounds heal wounds, right? And so when I think about you keeping that NCO back, it's that what Sebastian Younger talks about tribe, wounds heal wounds. It's out of the vulnerability of our own woundedness that we open that up to the other person and they see that they can survive that. And not only can they survive, but we can thrive afterwards. If we ask the right questions, if we do the good work afterwards, our woundedness becomes that very beautiful part that enables us to speak truth and hope into others' lives and to be for them what we need them to be for us. And it's this mutual feeding that happens within that community where we do grow, we do heal as much as possible. And though we bear the scars, the wound hopefully closes. So,
I'm listening to both of you guys kind of sort through what is such a sacred experience. And thank you for vulnerably sharing your time there too with Chris. And you've what I think you guys are kind of sorting through here just now is just that on off switch that you talked about. Mm-hmm. And I like the way that you guys both described it, because at first when you hear that on off switch and the way that you described, hey, we need you still, like there's a time to be guarded and go on to the next mission, and a time to come back and be able to feel what you need to feel. But I had two thoughts about that. Number one, what you guys just were unpacking is that there can be healing in compartmentalizing and staying on. Mm-hmm. And there's a way to take that to an extreme where it can be unhealthy. Like if we're avoiding mm-hmm. altogether, mm-hmm. But I'm hearing you can stay in the mission, yeah. But it was the fact that you were staying in the mission, staying on purpose with those that are part of the tribe, with the community. And that's what contributed to the healing. There is a time to separate yourself from that, come home, access those other resources. But without community, we get that to a dangerous place. Or when you pair that with a side obsession that allows you to avoid things altogether, I think that can be unhealthy as well. But I like the fact that you guys are saying there's a way to stay on purpose and to stay plugged in and still have healing.
I would say it gives meaning and purpose to what you just experienced. And I go to the point of Cody Harrington, who survived, coming down with Tyler Parton. And Cody Harrington just finished med school. And I think he's like a trauma surgeon or he's a trauma doc, whatever he is. Like Cody actually went and did something amazing with his life and gives that moment of Tyler's loss so much more meaning retroactively back in history. So what we continue to do moving forward gives those moments meaning. If we go, this bad thing, whatever it is, happened in my life, I can either let it define me or I can let it describe who I've become. Mm-hmm. And it all is in your locus of control internally.
And so I would love to ask both of you, Stoney, if I can start with you, what has healing looked like for you as a leader as you have really taken on that servant role and really thought to really care for everyone else and not ask for anything in return? If I can say on the outside, I would say maybe that's different. Maybe you've done something different, but I would say that has been really important to you to really be there for everybody. So what has care looked like for both of you guys as leaders since then?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Look, I think what we've been both focusing on in the last several minutes is community, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say that my own self-care, my own return, if you will, from these transformative experiences has been made possible by the community around me, the community of family, from my wife and father and siblings to my friends, to my fellow veteran soldiers. So that's where it all starts with me. Something that I've just learned about myself over the years is, and I think that's important for anyone, is to realize, those kinds of activities that they can do that helps them to put their own experiences into perspective. And so for me, writing about things does that, whether it's through a journal or through, maybe more formal study. And so I think that there's something in the process of writing that is cathartic for me, because I can, by putting abstract thoughts into concrete words on the page, and then I can objectify them, and then I can see them for what they are. And then I know what the problem is, and not to pathologize an experience, but so much of, at least for me, I don't want to project, so much of a moving beyond of healing is just a matter of knowing what I feel and knowing why I'm hurting. And I just can't do that until I see things on the page. And so the actual act of writing has really been helpful for me. And so everything from, I just talked about two really big different things. One is community outreach connection, and the other one is extreme introspection. And there's a balance there of that light and dark if you will, I think that has helped me for a matter of self-care. But look, there were a number of years where I just couldn't even talk about or think about my experiences in Iraq in 2006, 7, and 8, and in Afghanistan in 09 and 10 without just coming to tears. And I didn't understand why, right? I didn't understand why I couldn't think about that experience without that emotional angst welling up. And so it just took a little while for me to see that for what it is. If there's time, I'll talk a little bit more about, the formal study that I did on for my dissertation, which was on soldier suicide. But what I will tell you is for one of the chapters of my dissertation, I did a study. This was about 2018 or so. I did a study on contemporary American war literature. And at the time, there were 64 novels written about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, formal war novels about Iraq and Afghanistan. And of those 64, at the time, 24 of them were written by veterans of those wars. And I read them all as part of this study. And what stuck out to me was that an overwhelming majority of the main characters of those 24 war novels on Iraq and Afghanistan, written by veterans of those wars, suffered with either attempting suicide, completing it, or thoughts of suicidal fatalism.
Yeah.
And that was not necessarily so for the remaining 40 war novels. Certainly some of them did, but not to any degree of the same kind of percentage. And I had to stop and think about for a moment, after I kind of surveyed the literature, that like, hey, when the authors from a corpus of work speak in unison about a voice, speak in unison about an issue, we should stop and listen to what they're saying. And what's different about literature, rather than nonfiction books and history and what have you, what's different about literature is that it's a purposeful art form that is a projection of the human condition and the human experience. This is my belief as a student of literature. And so it's particularly relevant, I think. And so, I think that just, again, talks about community. Here's a community of authors trying to figure out what it is that they're feeling and why. And as they're projecting it onto their own art form, it keeps emerging and manifesting into this idea of pain and suffering. And I think that there's some kind of element that we have to get through of that pain and suffering, that catharsis, to be able to heal and to self-care. And I think at the end of the day, what we have to remember is that, look, war is a transformational experience. The mindset of war is oftentimes a fatalist one. On my first day of combat, one of my counterparts who was on his way out said, "Hey, look, you've got to the sooner you accept the fact that you're not coming home, you'll be able to do your job better and more easily." That's a dangerous fatalistic construct to adopt, but I understand what he was trying to say. To come back from that, to shirk that fatalistic mindset, is not an easy thing to do. And I just wonder if the problem of suicide that we've experienced over the years among Army veterans or military veterans is, some type of a blurring of the lines from those who had adopted that fatalistic mindset and realized it rather than transformed back out of it. But that's the coming home process, right? And just because you are physically at home does not mean that you've returned.
I think they did an excellent job with picturing that fatalistic mindset with Lieutenant Dan and Forrest Gump. And I think we can all find that soldier that we've related to, and a little bit of that within us. And I remember talking to one of our NCOs that I love, and I'm excited to see him this summer, talk about how he didn't feel like he had a hard time during that deployment because he wasn't married, he didn't have kids, and he fully expected to die. And he just, just accepted that, and that the rest of us had so much more to lose, and how difficult it was now that he is married and has children. And he understands how it's, you can't maintain that fatalistic mindset if you feel like you have these external ties that you're responsible to. And so it is getting back into, how do you now live when you were so surrounded by, I call it bizarro world. That's the easiest way I can contextualize it. It's bizarro world. The things that make sense in war don't make sense. And you only find that out when you come home and you crack a joke or you laugh at something and everybody's like, are you okay? And you're like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. That's just funny. Like, and that's how I cope. Right. To your point, you mentioned pain and suffering. And I remember it's something that I was blessed with early on, having some physical disabilities as a kid, and had a chance to really wrestle and yell at God early on in my elementary school years with that. And so for me, pain and suffering had been like a best friend. Like, I mean, we were roommates. I mean, he slept in the top bunk. And so I remember at the beginning of the deployment, we were doing some sort of a briefing, and I'm speaking off the cuff like a horrible extrovert that just says things and hope they're true. And I said at the briefing, I was like, if you don't know what you believe about life and death and good and evil, then this deployment's going to mess you up. And that was very unknowingly to me, very prescient in the sense of like, I find that people that wrestle with the deeper things and can exist within the mystery a little bit better, they have a better time coming back from the fatalistic mindset. Like, they're able to entertain and go, this is a capricious world. It's very fickle the sun shines on the good and the bad, and the rain falls on the just and the unjust. And who knows why it happens, but it happens. And it sounds kind of nihilistic or fatalistic, but it's this sense of like, I'm able to accept good things and bad things at different times. And so the closer you are to pain and suffering, the more you embrace it as a fact of life, which good Catholics do, that the better you are able to go, okay, this makes sense. I have a mailbox to put this information in. So the mail isn't just sitting on the floor piling up. And the last thing I wanted to touch on, when you said that it's kind of a light and dark, this whole thing of like being in community and at the same time knowing yourself and being I phrase it as, I wrote it down, known by others and knowing yourself. And going back and forth between those two dynamics, you actually find out who you really are, because others become this mirror by which we not only see ourselves reflected, we define ourselves within that group. They assist us in giving us worth and meaning and value and connection. And at the same time, when we sit within ourselves, we go, can I sit within my own skin? Am I comfortable with who I am? And as we grow and as we age and become more comfortable with who we are, and appreciate ourselves and become more graceful with who we are and grow in that, we have a place to contextualize these, as you say, transformative experiences, and it helps us to return from it. And so it's that knowledge, that self-knowledge and the wisdom that comes about who I am in the world, the nature of the world around me. But you got to process it. Mm-hmm. You can't just like sit back and just hope that you're going to be okay. You actually have to lean forward in the saddle and actually kind of ride that horse a little bit harder to go, how am I going to get there and not give up? You've got to be a champion for your own well-being to make that return from a transformative experience better. I wouldn't say easier, but definitely more effective. And to find that wholeness.
Well, and here's where I think we find ourselves is that we've got a considerable amount of leaders right now that have been through a lot of what you guys described today, where some of them are needing to come home a little bit more than maybe they have. Maybe they're just now starting to experience that the way that you described some of those that you're serving now, Matt. And so I wanted to go back, Stoney, to another aspect that you brought up, again, using the aftermath of Keating as that case study where, again, safe area, utilizing the resources, the on and off switch. But you also talked about this variable of having a new generation that was coming in, a new group that was coming in, and how do you assimilate them? And that's where I feel like we find ourselves today is we've got a whole cohort that is in huge need of healing, that's in need of community. It needs the feeling known and the opportunity to be introspective, what you guys just talked about. And yet here's this new generation coming in and trying to assimilate. So I guess maybe to close,
what do both of you feel like needs to happen? How do we, I guess in the book, I said it this way, where how do we recruit the next generation while simultaneously healing the current one?
No, it's a great question. I think you have to look no further than the first page of your book. Look, I was in battalion command when we withdrew from Afghanistan. And what really surprised me about that moment was the generational divide of who understood that experience and was moved by that because of firsthand experience having deployed to Afghanistan versus who didn't. And so there was this really interesting and surprising juxtaposition where the very senior sergeants first class, and certainly the first sergeants and the sergeant major and the battalion commanders of the brigade were the ones who had been to Afghanistan. And by and large, all of the majors, the company commanders, the platoon leaders, the junior platoon sergeants and below did not deploy to Afghanistan. And so there was a much deeper personal feeling of loss when that happened amongst the leaders. And it was this role reversal of, okay, as the battalion commander, I got to make sure that the leaders are doing okay. I'm usually spending most of my time checking on the new soldiers, the new lieutenants. And right now, like I've really got to invest in the first sergeants and the like, right? And so I was doing that. And I think I was maybe a few hours into just talking and walking around, checking on the soldiers that had been through Afghanistan. When I had to stop and pause and admit that I myself was actually pretty upset by this. And I went and I went to I went to behavioral health and I just talked to somebody about it. And then I pulled my soldiers together and I said, hey, look, this is what's happened in the world. And here's in the battalion who was there firsthand that are experiencing it. And let me just tell you guys, I am one of them. And so what did I do? What are some resources available? Let me just tell you what I did. Right. And I talked to them about how I went and just sat down and talked to somebody about it and how that is why those resources are there. That's why we're doing that. And I think there's a lead by example moment. Now, I'm not saying all this to kind of, oh, look at me kind of thing. Rather, that's the backdrop for my next statement. And that is that I was really surprised as to how similar the feelings were by the junior enlisted and by the lieutenants who had not experienced this Afghanistan experience firsthand. There's an interesting article in the Journal of American Medical Association that posits that it talks about soldier suicide. Let's just say that. And statistically speaking, most of the suicide attempts over the last several years are soldiers who have not deployed to combat.
No,
it's not just a matter of being a part of a deployment experience. It's rather being a part of an organization whose zeitgeist and culture it imbues the stress and demands of an army who's been at war for the last 20 years that is equally problematic and possibly equally causative for the epidemic of suicide that we saw. And so I just use that as a touch point. And I promise I'll shut up with one quick anecdote, and that is the anecdote of socks. When we go on foot marches, 12 miles, 15 miles away, there are pre-planned opportunities to sit down and swap out your socks because your feet are going to sweat. And if you don't take care of your feet, they're going to get blisters and you're not going to be able to finish the march. And the whole goal is to finish the march as an organization. Right now, I'm wearing smart wool socks. And if anytime you ask me what kind of socks I'm wearing, it's smart wool socks. Now, why is that? On October 4th, one day after the Battle of Keating, we got a care package pushed to us by our chaplain and chaplain assistant. And in that big box was a whole bundle of smart wool socks. And I took out one of them because I came down on this patrol and I needed to swap out my socks. I didn't have any extra. And it was smart wool socks. And I got back and I asked Matt, and I've asked Matt about this in the past, and he didn't remember this happening. I journaled vividly, and I have this for document.
Thank God you journal, man, because I don't remember a thing.
I said, Matt, where did y'all get these socks? And he goes, oh, well, those were from my drawer. Matt had thrown his own, best pairs of wool socks into this box. And for me, that pair of socks symbolized so much more than just the literal sock that I put on my foot. It was an opportunity to know that I was loved and cared for by someone in my community, enough to where he gave me his own. It's hard to get supplies in Afghanistan at this point of the war. He gave me his own pair of socks so that my feet could be fresh, right? And I think that, let's be the sock for our soldiers. Let's offer them the opportunity to sit down, to refresh, to be a part of the community, so that we can finish this together. And so I thank you for your personal sacrifice for that, Matt, but also just for the symbol of the gesture that offered.
When you're paralyzed and at your end, grab a hold of me, I will understand. Everybody learns the hard way, baby.
After our time with Stoney, I knew Matt would need a moment to reflect on the sweetness of what Stoney shared about Matt's impact on him and the troops they served together. After sitting quietly, gathering his thoughts, and swallowing the lump in his throat, here is what Matt shared.
There's a lot of beauty in this world. There's moments of heartache, there's moments of devastation, but there's a lot of beauty. And the most beautiful thing are the friendships that we make along the way. The gracefulness we have with ourselves, the connection that we have with others. That's the lasting thing. So invest in those moments and don't be too busy to stop and make friends. You never know when you're going to need them or when they're going to need you. And of all the stuff that's precious, that's the most precious thing, is the connections that you make in this community. And I would argue you can't make it in any other place. When I think about the people I've been able to serve with and connect with and make friendships with that I never would have met anywhere else, that's what gives my life meaning. That's what gives our life meaning and purpose and fullness. So take that time and invest in people, because the rest of the stuff you can't take with you. But when you can look across and see somebody smiling at you on Zoom and your heart is full, and you just wish you could reach through the screen and give them a hug, and you can't wait till the next time you get to, that's the good stuff.
I have often thought about the simplicity of the solution that keeps coming up again and again for the wicked cultural problem we currently find ourselves in. Taking care of people is difficult, costly, and even exhausting at times. I understand that many of us would rather have a different answer, something measurable, a task or a program, or something we can hold someone else accountable for. But can I be bold enough to remind us that this is the answer of a low performer and not a leader? It is disconnected and lazy. The messiness of doing life with others can bring joy, heal heartache, and more. It has the power to turn sour memories into something so much sweeter over time.
With all your edges on display.
Culture Shift podcast is sponsored by New Res and written and produced by me, author, speaker, and military clinical consultant Corie Weathers. This is a supplemental leadership podcast for the book Military Culture Shift, The Impact of War, Money, and Generational Perspective on Morale, Retention, and Leadership. Copies of the book can be purchased on Amazon, militaryfamilybooks.com, and your other favorite retailers. More information, including graphs, data, and other resources mentioned in the book, can be found on my website, CorieWeathers.com.